Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's RD2RD Live Show. Megan Boitano, joined by Lindsey McCoy to talk about startup resources for your business. And I have been anxiously awaiting today because I have a little bit of a, I don't want to call it girlpreneur crush on Lindsey and what she's done with her business over the last year. And really, I think there's a big focus, like I'm doing this on Facebook today, but to get a lot of our information, I think, over social media and searching. And Lindsey's done some other things, taking advantage of other resources that I am sure have stretched her in incredible ways. And we're going to dive into a little bit of a story about her business, but also how she's leveraged resources in her community, as well as some free grant funding through pitching her business. Lindsey, thank you so much for being here. Let's dive in and have you tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll just jump in.
Oh my gosh, I'm like ridiculously excited about this, and I've been looking forward to it, especially because you've been doing these live shows for over 2 years
Yeah.
now, right? Yeah, and I think they've been very helpful. And so when I went through this recent like grant competition process, I emailed you almost immediately, like, Megan, I think I'm finally cool enough. I think I finally have a topic to talk about. Can I be on your live
Yes.
show? You're like, yes. So I'm
Yep.
really excited.
No,
So thank
and
you.
that whole topic of grant funding, it's amazing how much, there is free money out there to start your business because we know it's expensive. There's a lot of costs. And, they always say you have to make investments in order to grow your business, but it's also difficult when maybe you don't have the money to make that investment up front. So kind of talking about how you go about finding out about these opportunities. But let's start, we're gonna get there, but we want to start out a
We'll get
little
there.
bit about, tell us about you, about your kind of career pathway and a little background. Lindsey and I met at Today's Dietitian a couple of years ago, and I've just been such a fan of hers. She just brightens up my day with her humor and her wit, and I follow her kind of like a stalker on social media, especially on Instagram, just because you're funny and entertaining and give great information too. So, a little shout out for you. And then I know you recently launched a podcast too, which I think is amazing. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, tell us, about you, and then, cliff notes in your career pathway.
Okay. So I grew up in Denver. I currently live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, though, by way of South Carolina. Yeah, makes sense. I graduated high school. I was actually like an overweight teen without a lot of resources or support for what to do next. So I started working at Starbucks, changed up my own habits, like saw an impact on my own health. And after a little bit of time at Starbucks, I thought, you know what, I can pursue college. Let's see what this is about. So I rolled in Metropolitan State University at Denver, a non-traditional commuter school, thinking like um, I had no idea like what college was. Nobody in my life had done it before. I was a first generation student. So I was like, I think I'll just take gen ed classes and then you transfer. So I show up first day at orientation. They're like, well, what are you interested in? Like, I don't know, nutrition, exercise. I don't know. So they gave me two printouts of like the courses you could take. And I got really into the nutrition classes and I got really into nutrition science. Actually ended up getting an extra minor in chemistry and just was not sure what I wanted to do. I didn't know, I had never heard the word dietitian until like my sophomore year of college, actually. um, and I wasn't totally committed to being a dietitian. I thought maybe I'd be in food science. And what ended up happening was after my junior year, like 2 weeks after finals, I went to my doctor and actually had some strange symptoms, ended up being diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma. And so following that, I did 6 months of chemo and radiation. And that was my first clinical experience ever, not beyond general like
Yeah.
doctor's appointments. So that was interesting because it exposed me to the side of clinical world and like just showed me more what that's about. And I still wasn't committed though, still wasn't sure. Ended up taking a road trip out to Oregon a semester before I graduated to visit Oregon State and Oregon Health Sciences
Amazing.
University. I know they were beautiful. I thought they were like what I wanted to do next. I was going to go for food science. And on my drive back home to Denver, I met my now husband in Utah.
Oh,
So
that's
that really
amazing.
threw
A road
yeah, it
trip love
really
story?
put me on a different path.
Ah,
Yeah, very unconventional love story. And so he's active duty Air Force. He was in South Carolina. So ended up realizing Iowa State, did a 6-month internship, I moved to Iowa to do it, moved back to Denver to take the exam, moved to South Carolina to work in bariatrics, and then switched to a diabetes
right.
role. Last year we moved to Wyoming and I started a private
So I
practice.
think, wow. Um, like from cancer diagnosis, dealing with, what must have been incredibly difficult, to your love story, to a bunch of moves and starting a business. I think all of us talk about the challenges and the realities of starting, following our entrepreneurial path, and that everybody has a really, nobody's journey is typically smooth, but yours seems particularly bumpy. So after you kind of got to Wyoming, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about how you decided, okay, you've been bouncing around, so now you're going to start kind of this business in Wyoming. What did you do first?
It's a really great question. So right around the time I met you at Today's Dietitian in Austin, so that was 2 years ago. Almost
Oh
3
gosh.
actually, maybe, I don't know. Anyways, that was kind of my first exposure. So I had worked in 2 clinics in South Carolina, but I knew there were dietitians online. I knew people shared nutrition information online. And it was kind of like you saw the glamorous aspects. You saw people with like lots of followers and doing cool brand partnerships and getting to cool travel stuff. And you're like, I want to
Yeah.
do that, like
Yes.
jealous. So I saw some of that and thought like, I didn't really understand much behind it. I just saw like the outcome. I saw the surface level of it. And so I started an Instagram account and I started posting some stuff. I started taking pictures. You can scroll all the way back down on
All
my
the way.
Instagram and look at how terrible it was. But I leave it there
Absolutely.
because like you said, everybody's journey is um like I think the idea like there's a conventional way to go is so ridiculous because everybody's unconventional. Like everybody has their own
Absolutely.
story. And you got to embrace it. So I started posting online, started learning more about like different stuff that dietitians do. Like I would click on different tabs and I'd see like this dietitian owns a private practice, this dietitian does writing, this dietitian does brand
Mm.
sponsorships. Um, so I saw that there were all these options, and like individually, I would look at those and be like, "Oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. Oh, I can
Yes,
do that."
the I like it all. Right.
Yeah, and it's like chaos, and especially when you're first starting and when you only see the outcome, you don't see what's
Right.
behind it. It's like whiplash. I was turning back and forth, just kind of swirling. So I was learning a lot, spinning my wheels, not doing anything productive in
Mhm.
my mind.
I really think
Um,
spinning your wheels is actually productive. I think other people call that pivoting,
yeah,
spinning your wheels. You call it all of those, all of the above.
yeah. I do appreciate that point that you're learning a lot. It just doesn't, yeah, you're learning so much, and there's just maybe not like a
Right.
structure or forward planning to it. And it's just like, let's see what's going on
Yes.
here. And so I'd started doing some of that. My husband got tasked with a tour to Korea. So I was in South Carolina and we knew we were going to move. We were actually originally supposed to move to Montana. And I quit my job to start the for the move. And those orders to Montana got dropped. So suddenly I was stuck in South Carolina without a
Huh.
job. Like, oh, what am I going to do now? Because we're still going to move in a few months, but we didn't know exactly when or where. So I just tried to focus a little bit more on like online work or see what this world is about. Clearly, there's things to do. So how can I get involved in that? But finally, when we did move to Wyoming, like almost a year later, still so bitter about that. That was just gung ho, horses out the gate, just everything, just go for
And you
it.
started a private practice, right? So started seeing clients in person mostly? Okay.
Yes. So I do have a private practice here because in Cheyenne, Wyoming, so Wyoming in general is the least populated state. We have like 500,000
Mhm.
people. Um, Cheyenne is the most populous city. We have about
Ooh,
60,000
big
people.
time.
I know, but there wasn't, from what I could see at first, a private practice dietitian. Um, and so I just kind of opened it thinking, you know what, I know other people do this. I know it's relatively straightforward. I know we have a scope of practice as dietitians. I'm licensed in this state. Like there's an opportunity there. Let me just go for it. And that kind of, my idea of that was to give myself some footing to build off of with online work that I'm still not totally confident about, or I don't feel like I've got my feet under me with it. So it's a balance with it.
No, that's really interesting. I'd love, I'm sure we'll chat at some point about, how you start, you grew your business, but I want to, dive into this topic of your experience with this entrepreneurial grant out of Wyoming. So tell us a little bit about this, maybe just, the specific, and then a little bit more globally about this type of funding in general.
Okay. I really love this topic because who doesn't love free money? And it was such a growth opportunity. So for this particular grant, it was the Southeast Wyoming Innovation Launchpad. Very fun name. It started in a couple other cities in Wyoming, I should say towns, not cities, to support economic growth in parts of the state that aren't the capital. And they were bringing it to Southeast Wyoming for the first time. So they'd already tested and validated it in a couple other places, and they were bringing it here. And so I saw an event at my local library, like an informational event last October. And it was, 6:00 one Tuesday night. I'm like, I'm going to go. I love my library. I'm going to go check it out. And I didn't actually think it applied to me. It seemed a little more like STEM focused, like you needed to be doing something cooler and like tech focused. But I'm an opportunist. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go check it out. I was one of like 3 people that showed up. Again, Wyoming. There's not a lot of people. But I kind of explained a little bit about what I was doing, that I have a private practice. Almost feel like I'm dabbling in online things and working on getting better. I don't feel as established with it. So that's maybe what I could apply for a grant for. He was like, yes, please apply for a grant, the organizer of it. And so I guess there was 30 something people that submitted. 10 people were selected as a finalist. I was notified in November. And then over the next 2 months, we did these little startup school classes. We had 2 lawyers in town come give a little 90-minute lecture. A couple accountants gave a 90-minute lecture, a marketing team here. So we got to learn a lot about businesses along the way. And then at the end in January, it culminated in this big community presentation of a pitch deck, which I had never heard that word before. I definitely never put one together. They gave us resources and support of how to do it. But we put together a pitch deck. It was a 12-minute presentation followed by 7 minutes of questions in front of anybody in the community and also a panel of judges. And then at the end, a handful of people were awarded funding. Yay! And I was one of them.
So a lot of that sounds pretty scary. And how did you kind of get through this anxiety or the maybe I can't do this feelings that I think are real when you're trying something new or out of your comfort zone?
That's such a good question. So one, I think it helped. I didn't really know what I was signing up for.
Fair enough.
Go in a little bit blindly and just trust the process, I guess. So when I submitted the application, I knew the outcome was grant funding. There wasn't really a lot of information about what was going to happen in between. So that was all a fun surprise. And I just went with it, rolled with it.
Have you looked for other like grant funding? Like now that you are aware of this, what other types of funding are available? But continue on that train of thought there.
Yeah.
Staying focused and scared.
That's a good question. So in terms of like the application for it, that wasn't so scary for me because I've gotten enough no's in my life that I don't mind putting out an application and hearing no. Like that's the worst that's going to happen. They're not going to write back like, this is awful. This is terrible. Why did you even bother wasting our time? Like go crawl under a rock. Like, I'm not going to hear that. It's fine. I can hear
That's
a no.
a really good point. No, if no is the worst thing you can hear, why not? Because maybe you'll get the opportunity to move forward in the process. So knowing that, your state that you were in had this specific funding, I think this is a really good point for people listening in, that looking into your community and even things that seem like they're focused more on, STEM or technology or even like healthcare, if you say, well, I don't qualify, well, how do you know if you don't try? Because you might just, you probably do. You actually could.
Yes.
I think Lindsey is a great example of, that mentality of just going forward until you get told no, because if that's the worst thing that could happen, why not at least try? Don't, cut the legs out from underneath yourself when you could possibly be moving forward. So let's, if we've talked a little bit about this whole idea of, grant funding, or which I know there's like pitch contests, and there's other things. You start to look online, you might be surprised what you'll find locally and then also nationally. But what other kind of startup resources that maybe aren't specific to dietitians? I feel like if you're in the online world, you're constantly kind of hit with very specific, whether it's advertising or people that you follow, dietitian specific business coaches or courses or content. It's just constantly in your feed, all up in your face about. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about maybe just business in general, not so focused right on nutrition private practice, because a lot of principles of business apply whether you're running a bakery or, a nutrition practice, right?
I love this question. So I finished my master's like a year ago, not even. And one of my last classes was this current issues and trends in dietetics class. And there was a lot of discussion and discourse about this feeling that dietitians are like pigeonholed into these roles. Like we are credentialed, often licensed, and have a scope of practice that's very well established. And that's great. We can fill those very specific niche roles. We can work in clinical, we can work in long-term care, we can work in like food service management, like these things. But sometimes there's the impression that that's all we can do. But like, we have a college degree. We're very like versatile skill set people. We also happen to have that specific credential. So they're like, we can do like anything, any job we want. Bonus that we can also do it as a dietitian. And I will say, for the grant that I applied to, I submitted my application, and I was told after the fact that I had the best application they had ever received. Just those dietitian skill sets of introducing the problem, providing like evidence-based data to support your points. I talked about like the prevalence of disease, the cost of the disease. I reflected it back to the cost on Wyoming's GDP. And they looked at that and like, all right, but that's because I'm a dietitian. Like I have that skill set. We have a lot of really great skills. So we can use those in business, whether or not it's dietitian related, if that makes sense.
Such a good point. Such a
Yeah.
good point.
But to answer your original question, so I've noticed that there's kind of three areas of resources I have found. So my library, I actually learned that business librarianship is a whole field.
Oh, do tell.
Who knew? So it's a whole field. Like, also fun random fact, I live in Laramie County, Wyoming, and we have the oldest continuously operating library system in the US.
That's a fun nugget of fact. So
a
business librarian is a field. So how do you know if you have like a business library? You just walk up and be like, hey, are they the person that coordinates events at the library? Talk to me about this business librarian.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's the same name for everybody, but my library has library, the number 2, business services. So we have a library business services coordinator at our library. She is a full-time employee, but she splits it. Like half of her time is focused on business. And that's because, overall in the US, like most people work for a small business, or like 50% plus, whatever. So it's worthwhile to invest in services that support small businesses in your community. So your local library probably has some type of business resources available to you. As dietitians, we're very well versed with like PubMed and like Gale Cengage and stuff like that, those databases. There are business databases and you can access them through your library. I was able to pull up business plans of dietitians that had submitted like legitimate actual business plans to a published database and just like see it for free at my local library. It was very helpful.
Wow. Because I think we tend to Google things, right? Looking online versus when we need something, a business librarian is probably very well trained in information related to business. I'm not sure if that's their title, but the person at your
Yeah.
library whose role is to provide resources for business owners. So that's really interesting. I go to my library, you know, I have 2 kids, so, you know, I probably wasn't a particularly busy library visitor, right, with Kindle and online books, and it's visit perhaps the library less. But I'm there all the time, and I constantly see like event notices for business related things. I'm like, oh, you know, the SCORE mentors are there, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about. You know, every Thursday you
Yes.
can, you know, see a business mentor there. So I think a really good point of making sure you're leveraging all of the resources at your, you know, your local library. We might write that off too easily or not think it's as valuable.
I was kind of bummed, well, not bummed, but at the exact same time this is happening, there's a copyright workshop at my library right now.
I feel
Like, that's
pretty
handy. Look how handy that is.
pretty honored that you're here with me instead, because
Much more excited
that's
about
a
this.
pretty interesting topic. I'm not, you know, I would have liked that.
Yeah.
So what resources have you found to be kind of the most helpful? I would have really liked to have seen that business plan that you just mentioned, but
Yeah. Well, see if your library has database access. And that was the point that she pointed me directly to it. I wasn't Googling and searching.
glorious.
Outside of library, the other 2 places I found help have been government organizations like the U.S. Small Business Administration and that sub-organization SCORE, SCORE. And then also my local university. So the grant that I applied to and was a participant of was hosted through University of Wyoming and in partnership with the community college here. And then University of Wyoming also has a Wyoming Women's Business Center and a Wyoming Technology Business Center, like 2 separate entities underneath the university. So I found that there's like, you know, community resources like a library, government resources that are both federal and state level, and then your university, like universities have business programs, go check them out. They want, you know, their students or their communities to succeed too. So those are the 3 places I found like my library the most, because that was like my gateway to all these other options.
How did you find these things? You mentioned, you know, you found something at your local university. Was that kind of through chance, or were you directed to that somehow specifically?
That's another good question. I forgot to mention too, local government would usually have some sort of business council. So there's like the Wyoming Business Council, and then there's a Cheyenne Leads, like creating economic development.
That's
So those are
actually a
more
really
government
important word, kind
organizations.
of that economic development. It might not be one that's in our typical search term, but that is a really important term, that there's things related to economic development, which typically focuses on small businesses in a community. So I think that's a term to write down and see what's available in that. Sometimes governments, the way they organize their website isn't necessarily how you might think it should be organized. It can be a little difficult to navigate figuring out what you want to find in state and.
Yeah, my husband's in the military. We have TRICARE. Our life is ridiculously filled with red tape and loopholes.
Me just trying to figure out how to pay my water bill on the city's website is much more difficult, I think, than writing my thesis some days. I'm like, why can I not find that page again? It moved.
Yeah. It's under 8 sublinks, yeah.
All right, so let's talk about business mentorship, because I can't tell you, every time I'm in a group and someone's asking about coaching or starting a business, someone says, go get a SCORE mentor. And first of all, what is SCORE? What's a SCORE mentor? And talk to us about this topic.
Yeah. So SCORE is actually kind of newer to me as terms of knowing it. So I knew the Small Business Administration. I didn't really know much about SCORE, and I didn't interact with it a whole bunch until recently, which I'm excited to be more involved in it. So I didn't know you could apply for a mentor with them. I haven't had that experience. But I'm participating. They're putting on a workshop in our community about, I'm contributing like fueling for career performance. And I get this like vendor fee waived and market my services and give back. So that's nice. My mentorship, they're like the people that I talk to for kind of one-on-one support, kind of came more from the university's resources, like the Technology Business Center, the Women's Business Center. You submit an application, you tell a little bit more about your business, what you're looking for. You can talk to people about accounting, you can talk to people about marketing. I was hoping for help with my website, but this is where my quite honest answer is like free business mentorship. I'm kind of neutral
Mhm.
about it. My experiences were meh. Like maybe you get what you pay for. Maybe it's my personality. Maybe it was the individuals I interacted with. I know we briefly discussed this on like Instagram, how I'm the type of person that will read every FAQ and like subreddit thread to find an answer rather than ask somebody else. So for me, having like a free mentor kind of give me the basics. I'm like, I Googled that already. Like,
Right. You're
thanks.
looking for something that's more specific and focused versus your personality might, if you're a big people person and you like learning through interaction, maybe. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good point, that finding someone who can offer some individual coaching, it might not necessarily be, a mentor, the same as, a paid business coach, right? In your experience,
Mm-hmm.
of course. So what do you think, switching gears, we're talking a lot about kind of these nuts and bolts, but you've had this journey over the last year, right, of kind of really getting this business up and going. Like, what do you think dietitians that are maybe sitting on the sidelines, or maybe are just have a little, a little nugget business idea, or maybe they're just kicking it around. They're like you when you were in South Carolina. They'd be like, this is something I'm going to do. What do you want them to know? What would you want them to kind of know from your experience?
If I could go back, I would tell myself, sit down, calm down, don't get whiplash. Like I mentioned in the beginning, you can open up tabs from 10 different dietitians' websites, all doing 10 different, wildly different things in their career, whether it's counseling, whether it's menu analysis, whether it's brand partnerships, whether it's writing. All of those are cool. I think a lot of us might be drawn to multiple aspects of the career. Like there's so many things we can do, they all sound fun. I like wish I didn't spin my head so much around and be like, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. I wish I would have just picked one thing and
How did you end
like
up picking one thing?
um it's been a growth. It's been a lot of becoming okay with it in a
Mm,
sense. So this is random specific, but there was this quote. I don't know when I heard it, where I heard it. It was like, my failures don't define me, but neither do my
mm,
successes. I think especially as like solopreneurs, there's so much of us wrapped into our business, and especially if we have an online presence where we're reflecting our own habits and routines, that's like an
right.
extension of us. And it's nice when that works out well, but then I also felt like if I'm going to commit to something, I have to be all into it. I have to really want it. It has to be like an extension of me. And now I've realized I'm me. I have a business. They are separate entities. And that's been very helpful for me to just kind of say, okay, I see there's an opportunity. I've learned that I see this problem. I have a solution. No matter what, some people are going to tell me no, some people are going to hate it. That's fine. I'm just going to focus on this one thing, and I'm not going to get distracted by 80 million things that I possibly could do. I'm just going to focus on
Right.
it.
That's really good point. I think the awareness, I'm a huge fan of, you know, meditation and some mindfulness. And it was interesting how that whole becoming aware of your thoughts and your feelings and how they impact you, how powerful awareness is. I think I was reading one of those Facebook posts about, tell us about what amazing things you're doing recently. And you read it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some weeks where maybe you've had a great week, and you're reading everybody else's and going, yay, 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 cheer, cheer. And then you maybe on a week where it was a little bit frustrating or you didn't get what you wanted to get done, you read it and you start to like berate yourself and you start to have that negative self-talk and to become aware of, I noticed that feeling in myself and immediately stopped and did like my mini, like a loving kindness practice of talking to myself in a way, but becoming aware of that impact of what you're reading, what you're seeing, and what it's doing to you. And I really think what you were saying is kind of becoming this awareness about your business and you, and being more conscious about those decisions can really, because it's hard starting your business. It's kind of you wrapped in there, but it isn't in a way as well. It can't be.
Yeah, having that separation. I so agree with the point about those like celebration posts. And like every single week, some people have good weeks. There might be 100 people that see that post, 10 people that comment. And of course, 10 people out of 100 having a good week, that's normal, but it's not always the same people every week. And I've had that same reaction. So this is something that I've been thinking about and I've decided to start this year is, at least on Instagram, I'm sharing my fail list. Like in January, I had 2 conference proposals rejected. Like I like speaking and I've submitted them. And I really thought I was a shoo-in for this one. Like a lot I've been, I'm just going to try for this. I really thought I was going to get this one. And that email, when I got it, like, thanks, like it was a competitive year. We appreciate your application. I'm like,
Exactly.
crestfallen.
It
is what it is.
Right.
It's normal.
And I think that that's important as, you know, if we're talking about starting a business, that those failures and the reality is wherever you're hanging out, you know, people are going to be sharing, you know, what went well and maybe their successes. You don't oftentimes hear necessarily about, you know, some of the failures that people have. So back to this topic about misconceptions about starting a business, and maybe if you want to dive a little bit more into, so you have your private practice and you decided to, you know, go ahead and get credentialed and do insurance based. What was that process like for you, and did it change? You talked about a business plan. How did you take some of what you were learning in these programs, and how did it change kind of what decisions did you make, or how did you do things differently based on the fact that you were having access to these resources? Is that question kind of clear?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So even last summer, just starting this practice, I do think I kind of got lucky in the fact that Wyoming doesn't have a lot of private insurers, or like there's so many employers. So I figured there's no private practice dietitian. There's 2 main insurers in the state, Blue Cross Blue Shield and Cigna. That's about it. Rent's inexpensive. It's a small town. People like to get involved in it. So I had a lot going for me, and I decided I'll get credentialed Blue Cross Blue Shield and Cigna here. That was kind of my start of actually making some legit money. Before, when I was like whiplash trying a bunch of stuff online, I was like, I wrote a couple random articles here. Randomness. So I started with the private practice and I recognized I had a lot of good going for me and I focused on that. So even just saying, I'm going to serve these adults, I specialize in cardiometabolic health and I only take these 2 insurances. It was easier for me to be like clear cut. Like if somebody with a pediatric appointment tried to contact me, I would say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not equipped to take you on. So that was very nice and helpful to get started, to just focus
like your local, like, did you go to doctor's offices and like most people would with their business? Did any of these tools that you learned helped, or what worked for you?
Oh my gosh, not really. So at least not the networking at first. I tried going to doctor's offices and it was kind of a cold reaction. But by participating in these other like extracurricular business experiences, like the networking with the economic development councils, whether it was the Wyoming Business Council or this Business Alliance stuff, those were some of the higher level people that introduced me rather than trying to go in straight to meet a doctor. So that was helpful.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. So that was getting this in-person practice up and going. What I think was most helpful is I still had the idea of recognizing like I want to be able to do something scalable online and impact more people outside of just Wyoming. And so when I was going through this process, we learned a lot about your problem, your solution. How do you determine market share? How do you look at your competition? What sort of revenue do you need to generate in order to support these activities? So I learned a lot about those like nitty gritty details, and being able to bounce ideas off of like, this is what I do in person. Here's how I can translate this very specific thing I do into a single online endeavor. Like I'm not going to buckshot try to do everything. Let me just try to focus on one thing. And then bouncing that idea off of like those nitty gritty details of like, who's going to be purchasing on this online? How can I scale this up? Like what sort of revenue am I going to be able to generate? How do I use that? And then like if I want to look at hiring somebody. So those business resources in town, not dietitian related whatsoever, were very helpful for me to scale back. Like I've been a practicing dietitian. I've worked in clinics. Like I can talk about nutrition. And so I figured I already know that. Let me focus on that. And as I'm learning this kind of new aspect of it, I'm not going to try to do everything. I'm just going to focus on what I already know, small, and then you can grow it in the future.
Really,
If that answers the
really, really
question.
good wisdom there. Because I think it's easy to take on too much or try to, create maybe multiple online programs at the same time. I like what you also mentioned about your initially profitability coming or making money with your business with that in-person practice. And I always want to get people's thoughts, having done this and not saying, I'm an expert, but people who are starting a practice and they also want to have an online component. Whether or not you would say, if I could go back, I would just really focus on the online element and then I would, wait on the in-person. This whole idea of when do you add this online element to your business, I think is interesting.
That's a good point. For me, I feel like it was so backwards because I had like started with Instagram without a purpose behind it. It was just like the glitz and glam of social media. So dumb. I can't roll my eyes hard enough at that now. And then I moved here and started the private practice. And I started slow. Like even my marketing now is still like health profs, provider directories, and a little bit of word of mouth from a couple providers I've networked with or like a couple key people. Which has been nice because then I'm not super busy, but those appointments I get paid well. I mean, I accept insurance. I enjoy it. I know some people don't, that's fine. And then it's like every single day that I show up and serve an in-person client, they come up with some type, I help them solve a problem and I know they're not the only person with that problem. I can help somebody else solve this problem online. So that's been the source of inspiration, like for my podcast so far. It's taking what I do in person on like an easy kind of relational level that's I'm comfortable with and familiar with, and then just recognizing, okay, I'm going to do this exact same thing. I'm going to narrow it down to this tiny little piece of what I do, and then I'm going to like amplify that tiny little piece online. So it's not too overwhelming, and it's not all the things or like all the web presence. Like I don't have a blog right now. I don't have a lot of things, I feel like, and I'm 100% okay with that because I'm just focused on what I am doing.
I think that all the things feeling that ultimately, who says you have to have all the things, right? You have a podcast. I don't know. That's kind of cool.
I'm pretty excited about it.
Cool. So what resources haven't we talked about when it comes to kind of starting up your business? What gaps do you see in the conversation we've had so far before we have to, start to wrap up this wonderful conversation? But that, you want to make sure that people know about for starting up or kind of bring some of these concepts, back together. Because I don't know, I feel like as a business we have this idea of, okay, I want to start a business. So I'm going to go into the dietitian learning mode and I'm going to learn and I'm going to learn and I'm going to read and I'm going to read. And then I'm going to start when I have some level of, I have to know a certain amount of this to move forward. And I think we do that a lot. So kind of that perception of this whole starting and learning and growing and shifting, and how, we've talked about some of these resources coming in. You were saying before, like, trust the process. And I think there's so much of that in this conversation where if you're like you're attending all of these events, you're, attending webinars, you're reading, maybe that there isn't a ready moment. You're like, okay, I'm ready now. Like, oh, phew, I arrived. Let's do this, Yeah.
If only. Wouldn't that be so nice? Yeah, that's a really good point. And I feel like even in this conversation, maybe I've gone back and forth. Like there's no perfect answer to it of like I started backwards, I feel like, and I wish I wouldn't. Like if I were to go back, I would do it differently maybe. Like I do wish I had some more education in some ways, but then you also just have to go for it. So I guess the things that if I were to go back now, I would, especially if you're new to an area, like I was new to an area, so it was nice to network and meet people at events and stuff. But check out what is in your local community, whether it's library services, school, university services, or government services. Google SCORE in your area, see if there's some workshops that you could attend. They also have online stuff that's helpful too.
Other small business owners can be a really great source of business for other small business owners.
Yeah, crazy. There's a lot of networking. Like there's a Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce here too. And they put on pretty much monthly networking events, and you don't necessarily have to be a member yet to attend the event. Like, you can get some free food and drinks, meet people, and become involved in your community, start to learn what's available. Google like your university's business page. I think just like see what's out there. If there's one thing that resonates with you, go with that. Work it a little bit, see if you like it, see if it gives you what you need or not, and then don't be afraid to like, okay, that was great, now it's time to change positions. But along the way, I always have to remind myself, like, business profitability first, like money tasks sometimes, of like, it is a business. As much as I love what I do, I can talk about a lot of things in nutrition and have fun with it, but I'm also reminding myself I'm building a business to support myself and my family. So think about on the smallest scale, like I know you've talked about this, especially in your RD2RD Jumpstart vendor program. Minimum viable product, like what's the tiniest little step you could take that would like make money and get you to be a business owner? You're an entrepreneur, and build off of it. Just start with like the tiniest step available to
Could I
you.
make this even a little bit smaller? Because the answer is probably yes. And it's probably got a little bit better chance to succeed if you're not overwhelmed, and you can move it forward. But I also love this idea of the free grant fund, grant money or funding that's available to make sure that you're looking for those types of opportunities, that there may be programs like you had kind of you had people come in and talk to you in really a focused teaching and education for you, that those types of opportunities may be on your doorstep or in your community or somewhere, even online. There's so much where you don't even have to be local. You might join in virtually. So start to explore what those options are. I know in my community, I'm in the Boston area, and there's an incredible amount of resources for businesses. Actually, it's almost a little bit overwhelming. So maybe in a place like Cheyenne, Wyoming, you'd be like, well, this is it. In somewhere like, the Boston area, it's just crazy. You can, like, it's amazing. So taking advantage of, even if you're in a small town or in a huge, metropolitan area where there's going to, we can't be in two more different types of places, right?
But I love that, because that means, to me, I was thinking about this, I'm like, if I have these resources available to me in Cheyenne, Wyoming, y'all have them available to you.
That's a really excellent point. So I want to make sure that people know how they can connect with you on, social media, check out your awesome podcast. I have to say, your first episode of your podcast, I just think it's just brilliant. Really, if you are just getting into private practice, or really talking about how you work with your clients in that session. I know maybe the whole point of that podcast episode isn't that, but for someone who's maybe feeling a little bit anxious or not sure, there's so many nuggets of gold in just that little first podcast episode that I was like, must listen. And it isn't even marketed that way, but there's so much goodness in there. So for anyone who has a practice or is thinking about starting one, if you haven't listened to Lindsey's first episode, it's really good. Anyway.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, because that's the whole point. Like, I like Instagram, but the content doesn't stay very long. I wanted something that I could direct people towards. And so far, pretty good response. But yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I waste way too much time there at Crave Nutrition RD. You can also find me on Facebook at Crave Nutrition RD. You can find my website, cravenutritionrd.com.
Branding wizard.
I know. And I bet you'll never guess what the name of my podcast
Crave
is.
Nutrition RD podcast.
There you go. That's linked on my website. It's also on all the major, like, iTunes, Spotify. And I would so love if anybody gives it a listen. Please leave a 5-star rating and a review. I would love to hear feedback and thoughts.
Definitely need to do that. Well, Lindsey, I've been a huge fan since we met at Today's Dietitian, and there's so many days where a little comment from you or just even watching your stories is such a bright spot in my day, because, life is sometimes kind of drudgery, right? And so thank you for being you and putting your voice and your message and just, out there in the world. You're so just I don't want to say, you're just normal and cool and honest, and I think that goes a really long way. And I think that's why, you know, people who come, stay, and follow you and love your content. So for everyone who's listening in, go check out Lindsey on her Crave Nutrition RD across everything.
Including RD2RD
And
Marketplace. Almost
RD2RD
forgot.
Marketplace. You can find her store on there as well. Really awesome freebie and paid tool on kitchen and pantry and meal planning, because this is your total, you excel in that area. I'm always like, oh, Lindsey's got her meals together for the week and I'm grabbing a box of mac and cheese again.
Real life. Some weeks
Yeah,
are better than
but that's
others.
life, right? So
Yep.
thank you everyone for being in on the listening in today. 2 weeks from, actually a week from today, because we're a little behind. I took 3 weeks in between. We have working with students, so talking about the ins and outs of paperwork and how do I, you know, meet with them? What kind of projects can I give them? You know, how do I use different students or interns? So that'll be a lot of fun. So next week we'll be talking about that on the live show. All right. Well, Lindsey, thanks again for coming on, and it was really fun.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this. I'm so happy. You're just like, you're my bright spot for the day. So thank you.
Well, feelings mutual. All right. Bye, everyone.